Every year, millions of people visit Key West and the Florida Keys in search of sun, fun, and relaxation. Much of the community's allure lies in decades of successful preservation efforts to retain the historic heritage of 3,000 buildings in its historic district.
Preservation means many things to many people. By definition, it means to maintain intact or unchanged. It may also mean to protect from harm. It may conjure up images of a couple who have spent years of painstaking work restoring a grand old house to its former glory. It may bring back memories of civic organizations in your town tirelessly raising money to protect an endangered building from the wrecking ball.
Or you may have seen whole communities revitalized with the successful preservation and adaptive use of a few prominent buildings.
In its purest form, it has more to do with how we connect with our history and our heritage than any particular building or historic site.
A successful preservation project can become the cornerstone that reinforces a sense of place and self and local pride.
No matter what the circumstances, preservation begins with a good story. The story should tell the history and relevance of a historic site.
It should spell out any immediate dangers to the structure. The story must embody a compelling argument for the historic significance as well as the functional worth of the site.
Anyone who has chosen to link their labor and finances to a building suffering from delayed maintenance and damage has their own story of trials, tribulations, and eventual triumphs.
Key West, Florida is a unique community that has experienced and overcome everything that Mother Nature and man has thrown at it. On an island that measures 2 miles by 4 miles lays the largest historical district of frame vernacular buildings in the United States. There are over 3,000 wooden structures ranging from grand mansions to historic wooden outhouses. Ponce de Leon claimed Florida, the Florida Keys, and the Tortugas for the Spanish Empire in 1513. The island was little more than a coral rock, sporadically inhabited by native Indians and used by Cuban fishermen. While they're a major tourist attraction today, the coral reefs and shallows have taken their toll on shipping throughout the decades. Wrecking, known today as ship salvage, drew a diverse group of entrepreneurs. During the 1840s, there was an average of 1 shipwreck per week. As a U.S. frontier territory in 1822, it began an unparalleled growth in Florida history. From 1865 until 1900, it was the largest city in the state of Florida and the wealthiest city per capita in the United States. This tiny island, located 100 miles from the mainland, is home to 22,000 residents.
Its shores are caressed by the waters of the Atlantic Ocean on one side and the Gulf of Mexico on the other.
That, coupled with a subtropical climate, attracts an influx of 2.5 million tourists a year. Like many historic districts throughout the nation, Key West has had its own challenges throughout the years. Destructive forces of nature, ranging from hurricanes to fires, have laid waste to vast areas of the island.
An ever-present danger for all wooden structures in our climate is termites and wood rot. Local residents are often heard exclaiming, "If the termites weren't holding hands, their houses would fall down." Local craftsmen consider them a carpenter's best friend.
In the past, Key West has faced the challenge of expanded growth by filling in vast areas of low-lying salt ponds and dredging fill from the shallow waters to create new real estate along the shores to meet growing development pressures. It's experienced urban growth problems like loss of a once vital downtown to shopping malls and the exodus of residents from the historic district to new subdivisions that stretch the length of the Florida Keys. It survived bankruptcy in 1934 and the debilitating effects of the Great Depression. Henry Flagler's Overseas Railroad, considered the eighth engineering wonder of the world, opened a modern transportation route for goods shipped from Cuba and the Panama Canal. The discovery of Florida pink shrimp brought 500 commercial shrimp boats to the docks for several decades.
In 1823, Commodore David Porter recognized the advantages of the island's location in deep-water ports. He was commissioned to lead the Navy's West Indian Squadron to eradicate the threat of pirates throughout the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. The squadron was called the Mosquito Fleet. Some say the name came from the reputation that, like a mosquito in a room, you know it's somewhere close, but never know when or how it will attack. Though you would never know it today, Key West started as an industrial city. The ever-changing industries that made Key West wealthy beyond compare in the 1800s are lost due to time and changing economies.
For example, industries like wrecking, sea salt production, turtle harvesting, and sponging. During the 1890s, Key West had 200 cigar factories, with 80% of the residents employed in the production of 100 million hand-rolled cigars a year. Pineapple canning and cigar box production were short-lived. A valuable export of the island were the sailing ships of all sizes and uses that were built by skilled draftsmen and ship's carpenters. A good example is the schooner Western Union that was built to lay and repair telegraph cables between Cuba and Key West. The ship was recently recognized as the official flagship of the state of Florida. With the advent of steamships, steam-generated electricity, and Henry Flagler's railroad, coal storage and transportation became big business. Key West, from its inception in 1822, has been a military town. Its prosperity has been directly linked to the ebb and flow of the military. Since then, it's been home to submarine, seaplane, blimp, Army, Navy, and Coast Guard bases. Its 4 forts played a vital role in the Union's Civil War blockade.
Key West was the epicenter of the Spanish-American War. It played a prominent role in both world wars, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Muriel boat lift. For the past 30 years, Key West's primary industry is tourism. Key West has become known as a vacation destination and a place where you can enjoy a tropical island experience without leaving the continental United States. When you think of Key West's unique history and the variety of events and people who have shaped Key West, it's hard to believe that its historic district has been able to retain its original charm and stock of historic buildings. It's no coincidence that you can stroll down the streets named after the town's founding fathers, lined by historic wooden structures that look much as they would have 100 years ago.
Key West was, in a way, blessed by a long and painful recovery from the Great Depression, bankruptcy in 1933, and the exodus of the Army after World War II. There was little new construction during the period, and by the 1970s, the heart of the Old Town Business District had become a collection of empty, boarded-up buildings. The community faced an internal struggle in the 1950s and 60s over whether to accept urban renewal funds from the government. While the government program offered an economic boom for some businesses, it also meant that many historic structures were demolished, disfigured, or swallowed by development.
As a result of World War II, the shortage of materials, all the cities in the country were suffering from deteriorating infrastructure, so the federal government came up with a plan, urban renewal, which was free money to the cities to tear down the old and rebuild with new. Key West had already formed the Old Island Restoration Foundation to preserve the historic district of Key West and the downtown. So the fight developed between the people who wanted to take the free money and the people who wanted to preserve the historic district of Key West. And the historic people finally prevailed over a much long fight there. And we saved the historic district. Most of the cities, of course, took the money, tore down their infrastructure, And the second part never happened. The federal government never gave them the money to rebuild.
The loss of some structures to fire and neglect, along with a growing awareness that tourism was one of our only industries, spurred a growing recognition of the importance of preserving our historic structures. In 1965, the community was shocked by their inability to stop the demolition of the Catholic Church's convent. Built in 1857, the large architecturally significant structure saw duty as a hospital during the Spanish-American War and served the community as a school for decades. Many residents still fondly recall their early years of learning at the convent. The eventual loss of the building pointed out the need to increase the boundaries of the historic district and to enact building code laws and policies to protect historic structures and the streetscapes surrounding them.
One of the easiest and often the most effective way to save a building is to find a different use for the structure. This practice is often referred to as adaptive use. If the adaptive use is a good fit and it retains the integrity and history of the structure, it can breathe new life into an historic site. One of the largest adaptive use projects in Key West is undoubtedly the Custom House.
The Key West Custom House is one of our most iconic structures here in Key West. It was opened for business in 1891, and this is one of two, it may be the only, Richardsonian Romanesque building in the state of Florida. For many, many years, the state of Florida Division of Historic Resources considered this to be their top preservation project. It was extremely important. It has a lot of materials that are not typical to Key West, a lot of brick, brownstone, terracotta, granite, and some of the interior details, plaster, historic plaster, is molded plaster. So what they have is decorative plaster, crown moldings, trim, details, and a lot of that. There was a post office here, which replaced the original one. It served as a federal courthouse as well, and the inquiry into the sinking of the battleship Maine was held here. Some of the other noteworthy historic events that happened, Thomas Edison developed the torpedo here. And rumor has it that they actually fired it out of the second floor window into the harbor, but there's actually no documentation that that ever occurred. This is actually the second Custom House in Key West. The original was constructed in 1836 and then moved to Duval Street. So oftentimes the people that are designing these buildings are not native to Florida. They may not be familiar with tropical, and they're also using styles of the day which maybe have been used before, say, in Washington, D.C. And the Richardsonian Romanesque building in the 1880s and 1890s was an extremely popular style, was used a lot for government buildings. It had a certain air and a stature to it, so they used that same building, that same design, here in Key West. A unique aspect of the building is the central staircase and the original spindles that were there. And we had a Frenchman who learned English while he was working on this building, who spent over a year cleaning paint off of the spindles in that central staircase. Cleaned them with paint strippers and a dental pick, removing the paint from inside all the ornate detail. It's quite a remarkable accomplishment for all the people who worked on the building.
After the Navy's occupation of the building, the structure stood vacant for nearly 40 years. There were many suggestions for new uses, but nothing really stuck. In 1989, the Key West Art and Historical Society started the monumental project of piecing the building back together.
The design approach was to maintain the historic character of the building to the greatest extent possible. So we abandoned early on any idea of doing an addition to the building.
After $9 million and 9 years of restoration and preservation, the Custom House stands as it did over 100 years ago. Not all buildings carry the historic significance or grandeur of the Custom House. Some stories are based on coincidences of time and place. During President Harry Truman's presidency, he and his wife Bess and daughter Margaret stayed many times in a naval building that came to be known as the Little White House.
The corner of Margaret and Truman is a building called the Margaret Truman Laundrette. While there is no history of the president or his daughter ever having done business at this location, the coincidence of the name lives on.
In Key West, we build to 180-mile-an-hour wind gusts, and that's the strongest building code anywhere in South Florida or the United States. How we do this is, first of all, we strap an entire home. We strap the roof to the top plate, we strap the top plate to the walls, we strap the walls to the wall plates, and we strap the wall plates to the concrete piers. The second feature is windows, because in any type of wind event, you are going to have flying projectiles. So what we do to harden our homes in Key West, particularly in the historic area as well as all of Key West, is we make sure that we've got adequate windows and adequate window covering. So you can handle this either two ways. You can have impact-resistant windows, which are rated up to 150 mile an hour for flying projectiles, or you can put a structural or metal panel over your windows, which will eliminate any type of flying projectile. One of the other unique features of our historic wood frame district is the fact that most of these homes utilize cisterns as their primary water source. These homes now are finding brand new uses for these cisterns. In many cases, they're uncovering them and they are using them for landscaping. They are using them for pools. They're using them for a number of water-related issues. And again, as I said, we try to maintain as many historic features because you can't get back history.
This is a typical traditional conch house in Key West. Most of the properties here were very small homes, typically not very large. This particular style as an eyebrow with the porch running across the front of the house is unique to Key West. It doesn't occur anywhere else that we are aware of. Significantly, when these houses are renovated, what you try to do is to maintain the small character of the house and all of the features that make it traditionally unique. In this particular case, we restored and renovated the house to its original characteristics and then did an addition on the side of the house that maintained the style of the house, was contemporary, lower scale, smaller than the original, and set back so that the primary characteristics of the building itself were still visible and read as an old historic house. We're very fortunate in Key West that we have the ability to incorporate in indoor-outdoor living lifestyle, where the houses, most of these older homes that are renovated, have had additions on them, have the ability to open the home to the rear yard of the property. Pools, landscaping are all incorporated into the property in a tropical, subtropical nature, and all of it allows us to expand our living space from inside the home to the exterior onto decks, pools, and the yard space. It's quite a unique feature.
Hundreds of homes in the historic district seem to defy standard roof design. They were built not only to keep water out of the structure, but also to collect fresh water that fell on the roof surface. In the 1800s, fresh water was a scarce commodity. These whimsical roof lines are called sawtooth roofs. The connecting slopes of gables funneled water from the roof valleys into downspouts that ran to a ground-level cistern. As families grew, the footprint of the house would grow. An additional sawtooth gable would be added, and water collection increased to meet the demands of a growing family. Another odd roof line based on a very practical function is the eyebrow house. Eyebrow houses originated from the tropical climates of the Caribbean. Eyebrow refers to the front porch roofs that partially cover and shade second-story windows. The roof shades the window openings and siding of the second story. The design is an effective way to reduce the temperature in a structure, especially when used in conjunction with roof scuttles. Roof scuttles derived their origins from boat builders and shipwrights during the 1800s. With a long history of local structures being built by sea-bearing craftsmen, many of the homes in town sport a roof scuttle on their tin roofs. A scuttle can best be described as a square opening on the roof that, when propped open, can let out the rising heat, and when fastened shut, can keep the rain out.
Gingerbread is an architectural detail that was all the rage during the Victorian age, with some of the best local work crafted by ship carpenters. Today, you can find a wide range of personalized designs scattered throughout town.
An important part of preserving a building is understanding and honoring what its origins are, what makes it unique, distinctive architectural design, and also how it fits into the surrounding neighborhood. The closeness of the buildings makes it essential that you get along with your neighbors. The best way to describe it is the small town adage, I don't care what you do, just as long as I know what you do. While the historic district is blessed with an unmatched cluster of historic wooden buildings, its true gift is a rich and thriving multicultural community. Every individual brought traditions and beliefs that over the years formed a unique mixture that permeates the very fabric of the island. You see it in the architectural style of buildings, street names, and even the food that surround you. Some historic destruction can be attributed to Mother Nature. Others are more devious in nature. This is a story of murder, deception, political intrigue, industrial espionage, gunpowder, weather, and coincidence. In the early morning hours of 1886, a fire was ignited next to the San Carlos Institute in the heart of the historic district. For the next 12 hours, it grew, consuming 2/3 of the town. It wasn't uncommon for cities in the 1800s to succumb to fire. Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern in her barn, setting a blaze that leveled Chicago in 1871. Key West's Great Fire started in a coffee shop. It is believed that 2 Spanish agents murdered a man who was in support of the revolution in Cuba against the Spanish Empire. They set fire to the shop to cover their evil deed, knowing it would spread to the San Carlos Institute next door. The San Carlos was built by Cuban emigres that had left decades of Spanish oppression in Cuba and had become the driving force behind the success of the cigar industry in Key West. Why would Spanish agents be so interested in setting Key West alight? Spain started selling Cuban tobacco on the international market to help raise funds for its soldiers in Cuba. Cuba was a huge economic powerhouse for the Spanish government. Ironically, the easy access to some of the best tobacco in the world and willing support of growing Cuban workforce based in Key West created a perfect condition for the birth of a very lucrative cigar industry. To add insult to injury, Key West cigar workers contributed a day's wages every week to support their brethren in the revolutionary efforts just 90 miles across the water. The initial fire burnt itself out a few blocks from where it started. Miraculously, against prevailing winds, it reignited back in the historic district and burned everything in its path to the Gulf of Mexico. The fire destroyed 16 of the largest cigar factories and nearly 600 homes. Conspiracy theorists like to point out that, in the midst of the confusion, it would be very easy for arsonists to torch cigar factories as the flames spread, and to direct the fire through the heart of the cigar district. It is also a coincidence that the only fire engine in town was sent to New York for repairs. Add to that, the Tobacco Leaf, a prominent industry newspaper, ran a story that the main paper in Havana reported that Key West had burned to the ground the day before it happened. Weather played a direct part in the fire. Dry months preceded the fire, and the cisterns were dry. In the 1800s, cisterns were the primary source of water. With a fire threatening your house, there were few options to fight it. Key West had a unique solution to that dilemma. The best way to create a fire break was to destroy the house between your house and the fire. Navy demolition experts would enter an unlucky home with a keg of gunpowder, lay a fuse from the house, and ignite the gunpowder, reducing the structure to a mound of rubble. The work was extremely dangerous. Imagine working with volatile kegs of gunpowder amidst swirling embers and advancing fire. The few deaths and injuries resulting from the fire were all gunpowder and fuse burn related. Whatever the cause and results of the fire, within 2 years, Key West's population had doubled, and the city was rebuilt bigger and better than before. By 1890, the island boasted 200 cigar factories, rolling 100 million cigars per year. Key West became known as the cigar capital of the world. Metal roofs became the norm, and the cluster of factories along the port spread throughout the island. The move created new neighborhoods on the outskirts of town and expanded the multicultural community. Mule-drawn trolley car lines were expanded, and commerce grew. New neighborhoods featuring cigar makers' cottages, like the 40 homes E.H. Gatto built for his workers, still stand today as a proud reminder of days gone by.
Key West has overcome its obstacles and celebrated its successes at every chance. Who doesn't enjoy a good parade, dance, or get-together?
As you stroll through the historic district, notice the abundance of metal shingled roofs. The use of metal roofs came about as a result of the Great 1886 fire. One factor in the fire's devastation was the close proximity of structures in the historic district and the use of dry wooden roofing material. Metal roofing is not only an effective fire deterrent, but it creates a good reflective surface, reducing the heat of the subtropical sun. A cheap and effective way to dress up a building or community is through the use of murals. Murals can convey what a structure once was, an expression of the community's heritage, or an artistic rendering of what it strives to become. No matter the size or scope of your project, good preservation begins with understanding that while you may be the owner of the building, your efforts should be approached as a steward of the site's history and a caretaker of its structure. The responsibility carries with it the foresight to see the building's relevance and place in the community as a whole. Its guiding light is that the structure will be saved from forces that could diminish its historic value. You will find appropriate adaptive uses when needed and help champion surrounding preservation efforts in other neighborhoods. Above all, you will tell the story of your building. Many ancient civilizations believe that repeating an ancestor's name helps keep them alive in the afterlife. Add your name and preservation story to your property and breathe new life into its future.